Hey, Tom.
Hey, Chris.
So, I'm thinking about what to do for our first Christmas special. There's only one Alpha Flight issue that mentions Christmas, and it's number 105.
Okay. What will I need to know? I'm sure a lot's changed in the, oh dear God, 80 issues between where we are and there. Why? Why am I reading so much Alpha Flight?
Well, Tom, there's too much to explain. There's too much to sum up, so we're not even going to try. We're going to look at the men of the team having a bachelor party for Madison Jeffries.
Okay. Are the women having a bachelorette party of their own at a male strip club, perchance?
My friend, you have truly absorbed what Alpha Flight is all about. You are correct, and the strip club is run by someone we have met, a former Alpha Flight villain.
Well, we haven't met too many of those. They've mostly been their own worst villains. I could see the Master running a strip club. He's absolutely got the name for it.
It's Pink Pearl.
What? Why?
No, Tom, more like, why not? The Holiday Spectacular! Hello, listeners. I'm your host, Chris Baker.
And I'm your other host, Tom Flynn.
As you can tell from our cold open homage, we've got a different kind of show today. Our first ever Holiday Spectacular! Tom's putting on a Santa hat right now, and it's adorable. We are stepping back from our regular coverage of Alpha Flight to have some fun, look back on our first calendar year of podcasting, and get into the spirit of the season.
And today we've got a very special episode for you. This isn't just our Holiday Spectacular, it's also our winter membership drive. We invite you to consider supporting us on Patreon. Your contributions help ensure that we can continue bringing you thoughtful, high-quality programming week after week. By subscribing, you'll not only help sustain the work you love, but you'll also gain access to exclusive bonus content, behind-the-scenes glimpses, and special perks just for our supporters.
If you join now, you'll be able to hear our special Thanksgiving episode where Tom spends 45 minutes telling us why he's thankful for the movie Highlander, complete with some custom music that I have to say I'm quite thankful for.
And that I had to modify to make anyone thankful that they listened to it. Didn't have that on my bingo card for the year.
Well, Tom, it has been a busy month of making Christmas happen, and I am ready to kick back with my best friend and enjoy some time together. I've got a glass of my homemade eggnog, true story, and a big pile of presents under the tree for our listeners. Let's unwrap the first one and see what you get. It's the official handbook of the Marvel Universe 1983 edition, but only the pages that have Alpha Flight on them.
In case you're unaware, the official handbook of the Marvel Universe is a 15-issue limited series published by Marvel starting in late 1983, where they describe every character in Marvel Comics alphabetically.
All right, when I was 11 or so, my introduction to comics was finding a short box of comics that my much older stepbrother had left at my dad's house. It contained every issue of the 1983 handbook, as well as every issue of Alpha Flight up to like number 30 or so. So that is how I learned to read comics, from the soap opera of Alpha Flight and the info dump of all the characters and powers from the handbooks. Like, it primed me for wanting to know more about them all and not really realizing the relative importance of each compared to the other. And I think that's part of what the point of this handbook series was. It was to take your favorite character seriously, even if it means giving really goofy characters like full-page spreads.
This explains so much about you.
Indeed.
We will not be listing the credits for each issue of this series because there's more than 36 people involved in each issue, and only a few at the very top worked on every issue, so, just reading through the credits gives you a glimpse of the scale of this project. The only one we will say with certainty is that John Byrne drew all the Alpha Flight entries.
And like half the other ones. Dude was everywhere in 1983. So, we go to Handbook issue number 1, where we have entries for both Alpha Flight as a whole and Aurora on her own. The Alpha Flight entry is just the names and headshots of the original 8 Alpha Flight members from issue number 1. Alpha Flight issue number 1. It is a half-page entry, which is a mark of being a lesser entry, but it's better than being in the appendix at the end. And it only says, organized by the now defunct Department H, the Canadian government's Ministry of Defense, Alpha Flight is now an independent team of superhumans banded together to aid humanity. The team is based in Ottawa, Canada.
And they spelled Marina's name wrong.
The handbook is so fun, Tom. My point would be, when they say the now defunct Department H, so that sounds to me like the way that they're conceiving of this is that Alpha Flight is Department H. That Department H isn't its own thing that JMH is fighting against. No, that's it. It's them and their jet, you know? And so I guess that's how the handbook defines it for us, so I guess maybe we can treat that as canon for now.
I think that for now is doing a lot of work there, because we know what's coming in the future for Department H as it gets adjusted and modified over time.
Oh, dude, Volume 2 is so much fun.
The full-page Aurora entry is a bit more interesting, giving us some insight into, well, how they think her powers work, but it really skips over any actual backstory. In all likelihood, Byrne probably hadn't come up with it yet, or... I don't know, this is the Marvel Handbook. Do we really need to get into all the trauma of growing up? Like, there's a lot to unpack with her backstory, so I don't know if you want to throw that into the handbook.
There's a bunch of explanation of how her powers work. Something about channeling the kinetic energy of the atomic motion of her body's molecules and using it to propel herself forward. And because the molecules have less energy, they get closer together and make her hard to withstand the wind and heat friction of super speed flight. Tom, I didn't make it through with a straight face.
Yeah, it very much reads like a comic book nerd coming up with a no prize explanation of how superpowers work. And I guess that's the whole point of the handbook, taking silly stories seriously. But it doesn't really tell us anything about Aurora as a character. It just explains how Marvel thinks her super speed works. It also mentions the blinding light she and Northstar can create when they make physical contact, and states it's as bright as a lighthouse. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for that entry. Before we move on, I just wanted to note the Aquarian from a few pages back. Jesus, the 70s were weird.
Oh, that was half the fun of doing this, was flipping through. And I didn't know that we were going to take notes of like who we thought, who stood out to us as we flipped through. But mine was Martin X from...
Yes!
From... Because he's right next to Marina.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm like, why is this guy get a full page? Good Lord. He wasn't even in the movies.
He was.
He had a cameo. Shut up. Where were we? As I mentioned before, the last page of each issue is an appendix of other characters that needed a quick note or otherwise didn't rate an actual entry, even a half-page one. For example, Black Goliath is stuck in the appendix with a note to See Giant Man 2. It's wild to see who gets an actual drawn entry and who gets stuck in the ash can in the back. So I scanned through all of those appendices and made sure that we caught any Alpha Flight references in there. And that's where I say who stood out to me.
Next up is issue number 4, where Guardian has a whole page entry. The origin printed here is in line with what we learned in Alpha Flight issues 2 through 3. The only significant difference is the handbook says Wolverine was the Canadian Ministry of Defense's first super agent. And, I quibble with that description, but it's a minor quibble.
Again, we get a very technical breakdown of how Guardian's battlesuit works. Nothing surprising unless you're an 11-year-old kid in 1983 learning about electromagnetism and computers for the first time. There are 1,200 electromagnetic projectors in Guardian's suit that use very, very low power, but together they can create a stress pattern around Guardian that like judos the Earth's EM power to whatever the wearer of the suit needs.
What I noticed was that the suit's computer has a built-in super GPS that lets Guardian navigate and plan out his not teleportation trick. It's super advanced for 1983. And when I say super GPS, the entry states... Guardian's battlesuit computer uses a high-resolution solid-state laser interferometry navigation system that can compute every component of the Earth's motions through space and sends every component of Guardian's movements relative to the Earth. Okay. Guys, that's insane. That's not super advanced. That's bonkers.
Oh yeah, no. And remember, this is the suit that incinerated him into a greasy pile of ash. And it says in the handbook that the suit uses low power conventional batteries to get 20 hours of operating time before the suit fails. Okay, conventional batteries, Tom. Are these like AA conventional batteries? Are these it's 1983. Are these D batteries?
It is a very form-fitting suit. I think we would notice if he had a few extra double Ds hidden under there.
I need a badum on that one. Or you can just leave me saying badum.
I might just do that.
All right, so how did these conventional batteries explode him into a greasy pile of ash? Look, you've got kids. I've got an incredible collection of rechargeable AA batteries, and I've had them for years. It's been great because you never run out of Wii controller batteries. But can my 4 AA battery recharger device explode me into a pile of greasy ash, and no one ever told me this? This is a great example of some nerd who isn't John Byrne reading a few Guardian appearances and nerding up an explanation of the suit that Byrne completely ignores when he wants to.
The next Alphen to appear in the handbook is Marina in issue number 7.
Hey, but they spelled her name right.
Put some spect on that name. Her origin is the same as what will be printed in Alpha Flight in a few months, but her powers are described differently. The handbook states she can swim at 51 knots, which is almost twice as fast as a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. But way back in issue number 1, some Navy guys caught her on the radar and said she was swimming at over 800 knots, which is 16 times faster for you listeners who won't do math.
And the handbook has a silly explanation for that. And it's worth quoting this one at length. Quote, Marina is also capable of massive acceleration through the water for short periods of time by shedding the outer layer of her skin, revealing a strange, nearly frictionless inner layer of skin that permits her to traverse through water faster than any known human-sized organism or object. Now, listeners, you've been with us since Marina's first appearance, so I hope you join us in saying, What the fuck?
No, but seriously. What? We've seen her.
But seriously, what the fuck?
We've seen her underwater. We've seen the sheds are out. Where did this come from? Was this a note that John?
Where did it go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe?
I just don't. I know I'll never know where this...
I'm at a loss.
I know I'll never know where this came from, but part of me wonders if this was a note, in character development that Byrne came up with as a cool idea, and then once he started drawing it, he's like, that's impossible for me to, communicate on the page, so he dropped it, but it's still made... I don't know. I care too much. This is stupid. Let's move on.
You know what? What I think this is... I think this plants the germ of the idea for the powers of the Generation X character, Husk. Because her power is to shed her skin and reveal a different form underneath, which is a really weird and gross power. And she would leave her skin around because that's what she did. I mean, she had to take it off. And so, yeah, the similarities are jarring considering this idea was I don't think this ever comes up again with Marina.
I gotta say, it's really interesting how close a lot of these characters, Generation X kind of as a whole, but also these Alpha Flight characters, how close they are to tipping over the line into full-on body horror at almost any given moment.
Oh yeah, no, there's going to be plenty of that. Mantlow's good at that.
Oh, shit.
Oh no, it's wild. And not just Wanda Langowski wild. We move on to issue number 8, where we see Northstar's entry. Unfortunately, it's almost exactly Aurora's entry describing powers, and nothing new comes to light.
John Paul is drawn here as distinctly beefier than he has ever drawn before or since. He's listed as being 5'11 and 165 pounds, and there's at least 25 more pounds than usual across his chest and arms.
I would expect you to notice that, Tom. In the same issue, we have a listing for Puck. No real new info on the bio here, but he is listed as being 3 foot 6 inches and 225 pounds, which is just so very intensely dense.
Yeah. He shouldn't be able to walk. That's There's no frame that can, it just, this is body horror. That just doesn't make sense.
What it reminds me of is the Bloodhound Gang song where they say, life is short and hard like a bodybuilding elf. Unfortunately, the next line is pretty problematic, but, we'll just cut it off there. However, that's what goes through my head whenever I think of Puck. Life is short and hard like a bodybuilding elf. It says Puck has no superpower and can lift/press 500 pounds, and that's dubious. Marina's amazing underwater physiology lets her press 600 pounds, according to the handbook, and Guardian can press 750 pounds. See, it's putting real numbers on things like that make the handbook a fool's errand, because it'll never be accurate. Like, I've seen a dude deadlift over 800 pounds and a different dude press 450 pounds. If Puck is able to press 500 pounds at 3'6", then he is as deep as he is tall. That's all I'm saying. And completely separate from Alpha Flight, the page after Puck is the listing for the Punisher, and it is just the absolute worst drawing of the Punisher I have ever seen. Just wanted to throw that in there.
This Punisher works in a dungeon, is all I'm saying. There's a real come hither vibe to the Punisher, and that should never be at play when it comes to the Punisher.
I think there's guy liner involved. You think that the Punisher swimsuit edition with just the big skull over his crotch is the worst that you'll ever see? No, my friend.
In the appendix of issue number 8, the Master gets an entry. It reads in its entirety, "Man who has lived for 40,000 years and has developed his mind and body to the peak of perfection." Which is, it's his deal. It leaves out some things, a lot of things, but that, you know what? Fair enough. That's the Master. Also, each issue of the handbook has, as its last entry before the appendix, a list of alien races that fit into the alphabetical section covered by that issue. So, this is where the Plodex would get an entry if they had one.
This is where I would keep my entry for the Plodex. If I had one.
But your mother took it.
Next up is issue number 9 with Sasquatch and Shaman. If you've listened to literally any other episode of this podcast, then Sasquatch's entry doesn't really tell us anything new at all. Some clarification about the order of his football career and postgraduate work and Department H involvement, but nothing that matters.
The handbook entries seem to want to be authoritative, but aren't always accurate to what close readers know.
Yeah, that's what the handbook does. It's an amazing way to get a thumbnail sketch of a character you're not familiar with, but a horrible way to check your knowledge about a character you are intimately familiar with.
And I will never let you forget that you and I are now intimately familiar with that asshole secret agent superhero Dr. Walter Langowski. Some things before we move on. 1. The entry states that Walt didn't go green in his gamma radiation thing because of interference from sunspots manifesting as the northern lights and blah, 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 blah. Again, we're trying to come up with explanations for things that maybe don't need explanations. 2, and...
Oh, it'll get explained in our next story arc.
Exciting. 2, and I quote, "In accordance with strict laws regarding the experimental use of gamma radiation, Langowski reported his results in full to the Canadian government." So no surprise here, but Walt is 100% a narc. 3.
And also, strict laws, Tom.
3. Based off of the adventure with Gilded Lily, we now know definitively he did not make his money from football, but absolutely inherited it, probably from strip mining. Last point, there's no mention of the work Walt or Puck did for Department H pre-Alpha Flight. Kind of elides all the spy/wet work shit we know is in their respective backgrounds.
Point of order, Puck's isn't as a spy. He was a freelance mercenary, and he was totally a bad guy.
Well, but this is also, that's why I said spy/wet work, because it suggested that...
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Next up is Shaman, whose entry gives us no new info at all, but does have this elegant phrasing, quote, "Dr. Michael Tuyugman was a surgeon who found that modern science was insufficient to accomplish everything he wanted to do, and so he turned to the mysticism his grandfather had told him about." That is both not inaccurate and not accurate at the same time. Bravo, whichever of a dozen writers pulled that bit of doublespeak together. Bravo.
It also mentions that his bag allows him to pull out magical talisman, among other things. 1, that is not the plural form of talisman. 2, kind of interesting given where we're at now that, they specifically mentioned talisman or talisman being pulled out.
I did not notice that, but you're right. That is not the plural of talisman.
Not remotely. But you know what? If we were to go through and pick apart the grammar or misspellings throughout this thing, other than like...
Holy shit, that would be a fantastic podcast.
Oh, God, that would fingernails on the chalkboard, playing with styrofoam, I would lose my mind. A minor point. At this time in 1983, the character of Jean Grey's Phoenix only gets an appendix entry because she is currently in a cocoon beneath the Hudson River until 1986, and Fantastic Four number 286, written and drawn by John Byrne. Oh, excuse me, Jean Byrne.
Thank you. That was... Next up, issue number 10 and Snowbird. Her biography is pretty much what we have seen, but her connection to Shaman is completely absent. You can really feel that the writers for these entries caught John Byrne at the coffee pot and asked him what they should write, and they got what he had at the time,
One thing that this clarifies for us is how Snowbird's powers interact with her baseline mass, here listed as 5'10" and 108 pounds, which is really, really small for a superhero.
Yeah, I once knew a woman with those exact dimensions, and let me tell you, she didn't exude an aura of physical presence. It was more an aura of a wee slip of a woman who's also kind of tall.
It says she can't shed her mass, so when she transforms into a creature smaller than her, it is a human-sized version of that animal. So we were absolutely correct in our reading of her turning into a big goddamn owl and a Wolverine that's 5 times the size of a real Wolverine. It specifically says she can gain mass to become a bear or something, but not lose mass. So no matter what, you're getting a 108-pound animal coming at you if you break the law in Canada.
Okay, wait, so when she transforms into mosquitoes, she's 108 pounds of mosquito?
That's so many mosquitoes.
Oh my God.
She could drain a full-grown human in a matter of moments.
She could drain a bear.
I mean, that's really what she should do more of is the mosquito thing, because that's just, that's wild.
Hey, you know what Snowbird can't do, Tom?
Moving on. Also, all the characters that have entries appear on the covers for their respective issues, which is, it's neat to see all the elephants with Marvel heavy hitters. I will note that Sasquatch looks goofy as shit on his cover, and Snowbird's eyes are wrong.
And finally, that brings us to issue number 11 in the entry for Talisman. Apparently, she had been planned out as far back as 1983. I told you John Byrne wanted Shaman's daughter on the team.
Chris, you ignorant slut. This talisman is an Australian Aboriginal with mystical powers who first appeared in Contest of Champions #1 and has been in a total of 15 other issues according to Comic Vine.
John Byrne and Chris Claremont love reusing names from minor characters. Jubilee also shares a name with a minor one-shot character that preceded her. And before we move on from the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, I just wanted to say that issue number 15 is nothing but weapons, hardware, and paraphernalia, explaining the gear some of the major heroes and villains use. I remember this issue from being a kid as the one I loved the most. The faux technical diagrams and the sheer effort of explanation really made an impact on me, clearly. I love Marvel Comics.
Well, golly, Chris, that was a great deep dive on a 40-plus-year-old series that is so out of date as to be useless. Support for this podcast comes from the Excelsior Embroidery Company. When your spouse says to get out the good towels because company is coming over, think of Excelsior Embroidery Company. And from the Eugene Judd Foundation for Wayward Youths, providing shabby accommodations to disadvantaged and disabled youth to produce the next generation of rough and tumble adventurers. The Judd Foundation. We do good work here, eh? And from listeners like you who subscribe to our Patreon as an investment in quality entertainment.
Well, Tom, time to unwrap the next present. Whose turn is it?
I believe it's my turn. And what we have is... It's X-Men Classic numbers 16, 26, and 27, the ones that had new pages added that include Alpha Flight.
That's right, buddy. For those who don't know, Classic X-Men is a title that started out as X-Men Classics and ended up as X-Men Classic. It is a reprint series that put older X-Men stories back on the stands and into new fans' hands. Each issue had a newly drawn, reimagined cover, and for a while had a couple of pages of new material written by Chris Claremont, or a backup story by Claremont, that helped fill in some of the unspoken backstory, as well as give people who already owned the original issue a reason to buy the new one. As a kid, I collected Uncanny X-Men starting at around issue number 300 and collected the original titles back to about number 220. I bought X-Men Classics to fill in the earlier, more expensive issues because I wanted to read the whole story, and it was an effective way to do so, though I didn't realize there was extra content in those issues because that was the first time I read them.
There are 3 issues we're looking at today that reprint X-Men number 109, Guardian's first appearance, and X-Men numbers 120 to 121, The Fight at the Calgary Stampede. First up, classic X-Men number 16 titled Home Are the Heroes, cover dated December 1987. Script by Chris Claremont, penciled by Kieran Dwyer, inked by Terry Austin, lettered by Ken Lopez, colored by Petra Scotese and or Glynis Oliver.
And to be clear, these credits are for the new material pages, not for the original issues. The cover it's fine. It's a reworking of the original cover with Guardian bursting from the ground, but done by Arthur Adams. Not my style. I prefer the original, but I will say that Adams draws Professor X as looking like a unique dude instead of a bald guy in a wheelchair. So it's nice to see a recognizable face that I'm like, oh, that doesn't just look like everybody else. Kind of cool. This book adds a page of Guardian's thoughts while on the plane invading America and tracking Wolverine. Inexplicably, it's mostly filler explanation of Wolverine's powers that is entirely unnecessary until the end of the page. And there, after lovingly describing Wolverine's amazing abilities, JMH thinks, "That's why I wanted you as leader of Alpha Flight, old friend. Because you're the best there is at what you do. Because you can't be beaten. Here's hoping my analysis is wrong. Even the computer can't give me a clear prediction. Everything I have, everything I am, rides on this mission, Wolverine. I won't fail."
Sorry to say, JMH, but you're the leader of Alpha Flight. Failure is not an option. It's a prerequisite. But we do get to see Colossus try to kill you again, and that's always a great scene. It's rather enjoyable. And I would say that that's that for the issue, except we get an explanation of his disappearing act. He actually goes through the process of popping out of the screen, which when we first read it, we had no idea what was going on. I mean, come on, we knew what was going on. But if you were reading it for the first time, you didn't know how he just disappeared. In this issue, they actually explain it a bit more, that this is a trick he hadn't tried before. It worked and it popped him however far away, et cetera, which, I don't know, kind of sucks some of the mystery out of it, but that's really not the point of these issues, I guess.
You know, it does kind of feel a little bit that way, that it's Claremont connecting things up and building the tissue that he wants to be the connective tissue between these. And that's not a complaint either.
Oh, it was a complaint on my end.
Next up, Classic X-Men number 26, titled Wanted, Wolverine, Dead or Alive. Cover dated October 1988. Script by Chris Claremont, penciled by Kieran Dwyer, inked by Terry Austin, lettered by Tom Orzechowski, colored by Gregory Wright.
The cover is dominated by Wolverine being surprised and grabbed by an enormous orange furry arm. That's right.
All right, I'm going to stop you right there, Tom. That sentence sounds a little weirder if you spend too much time on the internet. Moving on.
That's right. The moment Sasquatch yoinks Wolverine off the street gets promoted to the cover image here, right down to Wolverine in his Canadian cowboy cosplay outfit.
This is a reprint of X-Men number 120, which astute listeners will recall opens with JMH and Prime Minister Joseph Philippe Pierre Yves Elliott Trudeau talking about the X-Men in Department H's War Room. The extra page we care about is set right after that. It's captioned as later, as JMH is waiting for the rest of Alpha Flight to arrive, presumably having sent out the call. Again, the writer, Chris Claremont, for what it's worth, put most of JMH's words in the form of thought balloons and again focuses on JMH's desire for Wolverine to lead Alpha Flight. That is a theme that Claremont really drives home in these new pages. It's what he wants to fill in the gaps with. Nothing wrong with that. This is an X-Men book, after all.
JMH calls his wife Heather at her job at Yukon Oil, first time we learned where she worked as Mr. Beresford's secretary, and tells her that the boss won't take no for an answer and is sending Alpha Flight after Wolverine. He and Heather agree it's a fool's errand because Wolverine will just split again as soon as he has a chance, which is exactly how the story ends when Wolverine surrenders to JMH and then immediately Bugs Bunnies his way out of the special transport vehicle and shows up on the plane with the rest of the X-Men. Heather says, "You could refuse, Mac. You did before with Roxxon." And I think she means the American-Canadian Petroleum Company, where he worked under Jerome Jackson, who eventually ends up with Roxxon.
Sloppy, Claremont. Just sloppy.
This is an excellent moment to remind you that Why Not is supported by the Excelsior Embroidery Company, a subsidiary of the Roxxon Corporation. Roxxon has expanded beyond stripping the planet's resources with their new line of robot secretaries. Remember, robotics don't fall under HR. Roxxon, when you need to get your rocks off.
Oh, Excelsior sells the best sex spot polishing towels I've ever seen. They're just amazing. You get the sex spot's name embroidered on it. It's perfect. Where were we? JMH replies, "This isn't a corporation, Heather. This is my country. I took an oath. Whatever happens, I have to believe it is for the best." Look,
Oh, to live in a time when you could say your country isn't a corporation. My God.
Apparently Canada is not just like 5 corporations in a trench coat pretending to be a country. So I admire JMH willing to fuck over corporations without guilt, but I guess I'm just the wrong age to understand the rest of his sentiment. I don't think taking an oath to defend your country requires a Panglossian best of all possible worlds outlook.
Nice pull on the Panglossian.
Thank you. We took that class together.
We did. And finally, we have classic X-Men number 27 titled Shootout at the Stampede. Cover date November 1988. Script by Chris Claremont, pencil by Kieran Dwyer, inked by Terry Austin, lettered by Ken Lopez. The cover shows Alpha Flight standing over the defeated X-Men and, boy howdy, does that not represent what happens. I think it's the inking and coloring that rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, that late 80s X-Men classic style, it was a very distinct style. I remember seeing these on, like, the newsstand, actually. Like, they always had that kind of cheaper look to it. You know what I mean? Because these were sold for, like, $1, I think. Like, these are blatant cash grab, especially once they stopped putting in the stuff that Claremont was doing. And it was just straight up, hey, here's a reprint of X-Men number 193. Give me $1.
Yeah, I am not a fan of this art style whatsoever.
Yeah, when I was buying these, I didn't appreciate the covers at all and always just kind of skipped past the cover and looked at the real cover. We've joked before about how Canadian and American superheroes invade each other's countries frequently, but we finally get to see some of the political fallout in the 2 extra pages presented as interludes here. In the first, Alpha Flight government liaison Gary Cody is stonewalling a man named Hogarth who is demanding to see Cody's boss. Hogarth is the lawyer who owned the jet the X-Men were taking back from Japan when Shaman forced them down in Calgary with his magic blizzard, where Sasquatch picked up the jet and threw it into a hangar, causing a fire and utterly destroying the jet. Hogarth is here raising holy hell because he just had a couple of $1 million toy broken by the Canadian government.
Cody, being an excellent high-level government worker, was doing his level best to keep his job and keep Hogarth out of any room with anyone who could help him, when suddenly the Japanese ambassador to Canada bursts in and demands to see the foreign minister. And since he can actually do that, unlike Hogarth, Cody immediately shows him in. Japan, as a country, is livid that Canada has messed with the X-Men because the X-Men just saved Japan from something or other and the country considers them friends now. This is most likely Chris Claremont hinting that Mariko Yoshida is pulling some strings to use her power to help out her new friend Wolverine. And in the last panel, we find out this is not Gary Cody, but a different bearded government flunky named Keats. This should have been Gary Cody. It was even drawn to look a bit like him in the artist style, but I guess Claremont didn't know that name.
Sloppy Claremont. The next interlude shows the poor foreign minister facing off against Hogarth and the Japanese ambassador, who has been joined by the American ambassador. Realizing this has gotten wildly out of control, the foreign minister calls up the prime minister, Joseph Philippe Pierre Yves Elliott Trudeau, and wakes him up in the middle of the night because the Canadian superhero apparatus has done fucked up big time.
The final page of the book is a new epilogue showing Alpha Flight reviewing the wreckage of the transport vehicle Wolverine slashed his way out of. Guardian gets a call from the Prime Minister, tries to defend his people as best he can, but the PM says, do we have a voice for this, Trudeau?
No, I assume a standard Canadian Nixon is at play here.
I mean, I can...
As far as Alpha Flight is concerned, Vindicator, I consider the ramifications of this incident very carefully. If having a national super team means absorbing such potentially catastrophic fiscal liabilities, you and your compatriots may buy them a luxury Canada cannot afford.
These two panels of phone call go a long way towards explaining why Alpha Flight gets disbanded in its very next appearance.
After their only success at that point in time. I'm still upset about that. I'm like, they just did what they were supposed to do. Like, nothing got hurt except some fucking trees and, that poor lady's husband, but he's a dipshit. Who cares? And, like, why'd you fire them? Why'd you fire them, Joseph Philippe Pierre Yves Elliott Trudeau?
Well, because he figured out that they would do it for free.
Well, he was about to get tossed out of government, remember?
Yeah, there's that too.
He was probably trying to burn the whole department down and cover his tracks because he invaded America a few times, and he lost a few $1 billion worth of adamantium.
The amount we know about Canadian history at this juncture is just really upsetting.
Actually, now that I think about it, the way that John Byrne tied the real prime minister into this, yeah. When Heather shows up to be like, yo, my husband died. What are you guys going to do about this? And he's like, yeah, look, the prime minister's out. I'm literally squatting in his desk because nobody has noticed yet, and they're still paying me, so I'm here. Like tying that together and saying the prime minister was tossed out for financial mismanagement after a series of black ops affairs blew up in his face. And he misallocated an entirely staggering amount of money that for some reason he converted into precious metal and then bonded onto a psychopath and then lost the psychopath, who's now friends with Japan and wrecking his life. Like, that's what this is. It's the boomerang effect of Trudeau fucking up and Wolverine making friends in Japan, and now Japan is going to be the reason that he's getting forced out. Ha ha! I've got a big pegboard with yarn connecting points behind me.
Does he ever?
Listeners, thanks again for joining us for our winter membership drive. Remember that every pledge, no matter the size, means a meaningful difference in keeping our work independent and listener-driven. Think of it as an investment in the future of this show, a future made possible by you. If you value the stories, insights, and discussions we offer, then joining our Patreon community is the best way to ensure that we can keep doing what we do. So take a moment, visit our Patreon page, and consider making a contribution today. Together, we can continue creating content that matters, all thanks to your generous support.
And on the topic of generosity, Chris, I think it's time for you to open one.
Ah, so generous, Tom. It's a bunch of outtakes from our episodes that the listeners have never heard before. Gosh, Tom, you shouldn't have. This is too much.
That's right, folks. It's a selection of outtakes I've compiled this year that the listeners, you, have never heard. Sometimes things just don't work with the flow of an episode, but are still pretty funny or inappropriate. So here's my Christmas gift to you, dear listeners, because I appreciate you and want you to be happy.
I've been sitting here staring at these the entire time. I have all of the hero clicks of Alpha Flight just sitting right next to me here.
Oh, that's awesome. That fuck is so tiny.
Yeah, he's wee little feller, ain't he?
These are actually at scale. That's amazing.
I mean, really, the Sasquatch could poop out Puck.
Oh, yeah. Sasquatch is supposed to be 10 feet tall. Dear God, what is that thing?
Yeah.
Big.
Oh, look, you have Guardian blowing up. Oh, too soon?
No, we've already covered that.
I think that's his suit powered up, Rick. I don't think that's actually him blowing up.
Hang on a second.
Can we tell the
Give me a
reference
little
anymore?
firecracker. I can make this happen.
It's just Guardian. Gotta glow up.
Damn it.
Well, welcome to Why Not episode 14. We're gonna laugh for like 25 minutes over the course of this show, guys.
Welcome to Why Not episode 14. This might be it.
I told
don't know.
I told my wife, I said,
I'm
no.
excited to see your guys' take on a Power Pack podcast. There's only one other one out there.
I told my wife, I said, hey, no, I don't need to eat dinner before this. It's only going to be a half an hour.
Yeah.
Oh shit. Same conversation. I had eaten dinner, but it was more like, so when are you gonna be free? I'm like, probably 45 minutes. We'll see. 45 minutes later, we start recording.
Well, you know, Jeff, our tagline is that we host the best podcast about Alpha Flight that you'll ever hear.
It's
true.
It is true. I've listened. I'm
Yeah.
a listener.
Yeah, we're listeners.
I'm not only a listener. I'm a forced participant.
And if you look at Jeff's head,
You
you
know
can
what?
see that
No.
becoming a member has actually improved.
Jeff, I'm ripping that and I'm using that as our new
You're welcome
tagline.
to.
I'm not just a listener. I'm a forced participant. I want everyone to be going through what we're going
so
through.
you just
God,
keep, you
that's
just
going
keep,
to end up
you
on
just
the
keep
TikTok.
I
Tom.
gifted it to you, but it's a nickel a use.
You just keep Tom wrapped up in his chair and with a ball gag in his mouth, saying, "No, let me out, let me out."
a little bit.
You will read the
bit.
issue, or else you'll get the hose again.
Jesus Christ.
Why do we read these issues, Chris?
So that way we don't get beat.
Very good.
You were really good at that.
I watched a lot of game shows.
Yeah. No, I mean, this.
Same thing.
Yeah.
It's just applied to drama, and that's why it sounds so soap opera-y. I also watched a lot of Batman live.
Yeah. I watched a lot of.
I've seen the whole thing.
Yeah.
A few times because I have a few kids. And when you really want to get a kid to sleep and they want to stay up late doing something with you, you put that on and they're out in like 20 minutes, generally. Also, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's like Unisom to kids.
Well, those parenting notes.
All right, there's a cat all up in my business, so we're going to pause this for a moment because now I'm sitting on an inflatable ball that when she claws at it is going to pop and I'm going to fall because everything sucks. with
Everything is
pets.
awesome. Hello, Sasquatch. No, that's a little too British.
Oh, that's fantastic.
No,
It's
the
a
funny thing
Christmas gift
is,
for you listeners on the clip show.
Roger says the concept of a. Do we have a voice for Roger yet?
Not really. Cut this out.
Should we go a little nerd lord?
Yeah, we should go a little nerd lord because he's going to turn into a very unpleasant incel later.
Support for this podcast comes from the Excelsior Embroidery Company and from the Little Langowski Urban Achievers, working with inner city children of promise but without the necessary means for a higher education. Every Little Langowski is guaranteed a paid college education provided they go into the study of gamma radiation and can run a 40-yard dash in less than 4.8 seconds. And aren't mutants, because Walt don't want that smoke.
And from listeners like you who subscribe to our Patreon. As you think about the hours you have spent with us this year, please consider becoming a Beta Flight level member for only $5 a month. At that level, you not only receive the satisfaction of supporting creators you value, but you will also get access to at least one exclusive episode every month. Sign up now to hear our Why Not Have a Drink episode, where we discuss Tom's favorite movie from childhood, Highlander.
You know, every time we bring up that was my favorite movie from childhood, it really, I don't know how people think about me after hearing that.
That's why I said it.
And now we come to the meat of the issue. The only Alpha Flight Christmas issue, number 105, titled The Bachelor Party. And if that doesn't pique your interest, then why the hell are you here?
Credits read Lobdell / Morgan / Icy / Chang / Sharon / Chase / DeFalco with no jobs listed. In case you don't read credits as often as we do, that seems to line up with writing, pencils, inks, letters, and editing, respectively.
Since we're moving 80-plus issues into the future, we're not going to get into all the details of this issue. We'll save that for when we hit it in our regular schedule.
This is after the Matlow era, so there have been so many status quo changes that we couldn't possibly set the scene completely. Like I said in the beginning of the episode, too much to explain, so let me sum up. Alpha Flight is preparing for its first intra-team wedding, so the boys and the girls are having their wild night out in this issue.
The cover says, Alpha Flight in a Christmas Tale, starring Weapon Omega as Santa, Box as Santa's sled, and North Star as himself. God, I wish they had said North Star is the world's grumpiest elf as he grumpily slouches on top of the Box sleigh, which is utterly unrecognizable to those who only know the Roger Box pro wrestler looking Box armor. This is the era where Madison Jeffries is inhabiting the armor and using his abilities to transmute the material into whatever it is he needs to be, and tonight he needs to be a Santa sleigh.
So you're telling me that the cover features North Star riding Box? North Star is wearing a different costume than we have seen yet. It is all black with some white accents and a red maple leaf on the left breast. The same costume is worn by Weapon Omega, who also has a black Spider-Man-looking mask over his head. He looks scary and intimidating, and he's sliding down a chimney with a big sack over his shoulder. I think it's a good cover. Since we haven't met Weapon Omega by that name on the show yet, I'll spoil the surprise and tell you it's Wildchild from Omega Flight, who has reformed after trying to kill JMH and been brought onto the team because apparently Canada has about a dozen superpowered people in it, so they have to work with what they got. The rest of the boys on the team are longtime stalwarts Puck, Sasquatch, North Star, Madison Jeffries, the aforementioned Wildchild, and newcomer to the team, Windshear, a British mutant who worked as a fixer for Roxxon Oil before jumping ship and trying to be a good guy. He's bland, and he sucks. I can't wait to tell you all about him in a couple years when we get there. And since we mentioned Roxxon, we are legally required to say that we do take financial support from the Excelsior Embroidery Company, which is a subsidiary of the Roxxon Corporation. Moving on.
The Distaff team members are team leader Heather Hudson, Aurora, and Diamond Lil, another Omega Flight member who helped kill JMH, but is now reformed and on the team. We're going to leave the wedding story entirely out of this because it'll be more fun to explain that once you know what came before. The boys are back in the bar we first met Puck in back in issue number 1 when he cartwheeled out to join Alpha Flight. They're in their civvies, out for a wild night of drinking and male bonding on Christmas Eve. Judd, as they call him, tries to tell his old coworkers that he's actually Puck of Alpha Flight, and the entire bar laughs him off, asking if he's sure he's not Sasquatch and if he can get someone a date with Aurora.
Poor Puck. North Star and Windshear are left alone for a moment and chat about Aurora's current mental state. The conversation is unimportant, it's the background that's great. Over North Star's shoulder, we see 2 men sitting at a table, while 3 men at a table next to them yell, "Hey, fruitcakes, this bar's for real men!" North Star says he has something to tend to, but doesn't get up. We just see, in the background, the 3 men suddenly standing, pants around their ankles, and neckties tied to the overhead light. It's a great little throwaway scene that, if you know, you know.
Okay, and a little more context that Chris has fed me. The next issue of Alpha Flight is the famous issue number 106, where North Star officially comes out as gay and rocks the mainstream superhero comic book world. So, good job, Scott Lobdell. I like most of what you do. I think. I haven't read it yet. We'll get there.
The boys' night out is interrupted when a dipshit with a shotgun barges in to rob the bar. As far as desperate plans for money go, this one is pretty bad. He demands the money and says he'll pay it back with interest, causing the table of Alpha Flight heroes to burst out laughing, while Puck yells, "Of all the gin joints in all the world!" And if that quote doesn't date Puck as super old, then I don't know what does.
The boys quickly disarm and apprehend the would-be crook, who explains to Sasquatch that he's only stealing the money because his landlord raised rent, and if he doesn't pay tonight on Christmas Eve, he and his family will be on the street tomorrow, Christmas Day. Which isn't how most leases work, but what do I know about Canada, that dystopian hellscape in the 616?
You know, in my own personal experience, we once went to when I was a kid, my mom was renting a house, and we went to church on Christmas morning, and we came back to a message on our machine from the realtor saying, "Hey, Merry Christmas, we sold your house, and you need to be out by New Year's."
See, that fits with the dystopian hellscape that is the United States of America in our reality, but,
This was in 1989.
I fully believe it.
So, anyway, there's a fun story from my past. That's one of those fun stories that people say, hey, isn't that actually a trauma? And I'm like, yeah.
I mean, there are very few fun stories that aren't actually trauma. We don't need to go... Merry Christmas.
What am I supposed to do about it now? Merry Christmas, everybody.
The boys decided to take pity on the robber since he didn't even have his shotgun loaded, though I don't think the law really cares about that. Whatevs. As they escort the criminal out, the bartender calls Puck over and says, I owe you an apology. It's obvious you do know a few members of Alpha Flight. Any chance you can get me an 8x10 of Guardian? It's the little things like this that, make light issues like this fun.
Oh, so fun. So this squad of drunk superheroes has decided the luckless robber is going to get the Christmas treat of his life tonight. Sasquatch, Puck, and Windshear show up at the robber's landlord's house, where the landlord is counting dollar bills by candlelight and singing, I wish me a Merry Christmas. The superheroes barge in, identify themselves as the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, and that they want to buy a house. Tonight. Right now. Which makes me wonder, what did they buy the house with? Because Sasquatch is Sasquatch. He doesn't have pockets.
I mean, I think buy...
And Windshear is shirtless for some reason.
I think buy is a very loose term in this situation.
And Puck is wearing like somebody else's coat and standing on a stool. The whole thing is it's the least intimidating thing I can imagine, except for the fact that, Sasquatch.
Yeah, I think that's all you really need is Sasquatch.
Yeah, I think he's pretty much like, here, I'm going to give you these twigs and sticks that I just pulled off of my ass, and you're going to give me the deed to that house, right? And the landlord's like, yeah, sure thing, man. Here you go. Here's the paper.
Meanwhile, Box and Wildchild escort the robber back home to his family and wish they could do something more for him, but it's 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve and you can't go get toys at that hour. When suddenly, Northstar appears with an enormous pile of scrap metal pulled from miles around, and Jeffries transforms the junk into toys and what has got to be the heaviest and least useful Christmas tree ever. Wildchild then says, while I, the team's resident covert operative, play Santa's little helper and deliver the toys. Which he does by walking in the front door of the house. I didn't expect him to climb down the chimney or anything, but come on, Kyle, a covert operative never uses the front door. Like, the guy just walked into his house. He's got to be in there tearfully telling his wife what's going on. There's no way Kyle is sneaking in there through the front goddamn door with 400 pounds of metal clanking in a goddamn sack.
So with their good deed done for the day, the boys continue carousing until they all head home for some well-deserved rest. Northstar flies into his apartment at 3 a.m. thinking, there's nothing like
a warm bed after a night of male bonding.
And Scott Lobdell, I take it all back.
Just as he arrives, the phone begins ringing, and in classic pre-cell phones storytelling style, he lets the answering machine pick up and hears the message in real time. Hello, Jean-Paul? This is Jean-Marie. Mrs. Hudson, Mrs. Crawley and I have been arrested as a result of a fight. How was I to know Pink Pearl became a legitimate businesswoman after her acquittal? Now, you are not to breathe a word of this to anyone, but we need you to bring us bail money at Precinct 13. Whereupon Northstar climbs into bed and says, Zeta Aurora, always joking around.
Of the three Alphen ladies involved, I could totally see Diamond Lil in this situation, but Heather and Jean-Marie behind bars for this in their ridiculous early 90s going out clothes is, and always will be, a hilarious mental image for me.
And thus ends a delightful Christmas Eve, drunkenly helping out stupid robbers, picking on homophobes in a bar, getting into a brawl at a male strip club, and stealing enough metal to affect the meth trade for 15 miles in every direction. Alpha Flight, everybody!
Well, quick rundown. I don't think that the strip club counts as sex, so no sex there. I don't think that there was any failure on the part of Alpha Flight. The robber was clearly a failure, but they did what they set out to do. I wouldn't really say there were team-ups. And nobody died. Nobody died, Tom.
It's a Christmas miracle.
Thank you. I didn't even realize that's what I was setting you up for, and that's what I wanted, but it's perfect. I love doing this with you. Gosh, folks, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for coming along for our winter membership drive, and I hope you found it worthwhile. If you're still listening to our winter membership drive, then you are clearly one of our kind of people. Now is the perfect time to consider supporting us on Patreon. Your contribution directly fuels the work we do, allowing us to maintain the quality and independence you've come to expect. We can't do it without you. Your support makes a real difference in our ability to keep moving forward, so please, take a moment, head to our Patreon page, and become a part of something bigger today.
Why Not Read Alpha Flight is released every other week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at www.thewhynotpod.com, where you can leave us a comment with your question or praise us, because, you can leave the hating at home. Or email us at whynotapod@gmail.com. That's whynotehpod@gmail.com. We would love to try to answer your Alpha Flight questions, and I have to believe you have some after this episode.
Why Not is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis. It is produced and edited by Tom Flynn, with background cat noises provided by a chonk calico named Teeny. Our special theme music today is the song Oi to the World, as recorded by Tequila and the Sunrise Gang. If you'd like to talk more about the meaning of the song and its dated portrayal of skinheads, hit us up on Blue Sky. Our username is Why Not Podcast, and we would love to hear from you.
And from Chris and me and our backers at the Roxxon Corporation, happy holidays, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Have a great Yule, everybody. See you next year. I was afraid that you were just going to, grab the microphone and be like, Roxxon has expanded beyond stripping the planet's resources with their next life secretaries. Remember, robots don't fall under HR. Roxxon when you need to get your rocks off. That's how we end the episode, with an unhinged, drunken rant from Tom into the microphone about the Roxxon Corporation.
I didn't know that Roxxon was backing it. I didn't even know they were real. I saw a letter with a header on it and looked into it, and my God, everyone, run for your lives.
But seriously, Excelsior makes the best sex bot polishing towel I've ever used. It's got this nice pile to it. It really gets the jizz stains off. All right, shutting it down.